So, the other day, I was watching a documentary on the young adult novel series Goosebumps and how it became popular and how it skyrocketed and how they had a big lawsuit with Scholastic. I did not know that they had rebooted the series like a couple of times in the 2000s. That was wild to me. And it was able to maintain its relevancy up until then. But I also didn't know the reason why the success of Goosebumps got thwarted a little bit was because of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter. That I did not know, which was very interesting. Which led me to the question, what is our modern day Goosebumps for the kids? Like, what are the kids reading that is like Goosebumps equivalent? Like, is there like a young adult horror novel for them to read? Is there like a magic tree house for them? One of the last like big young adult novels that a lot of the youth was fucking with was Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. Do the kids, does Gen Alpha have their own Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief? Do they have that for themselves? I don't know. That's just a question I got. But anyway, y'all, welcome to my channel. Hello guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Exis and this is my channel Exis Does. So welcome. I am happy to see you guys again, and I'm here with a new segment. Yes, new segments. Okay, so as I mentioned in my other video, I have been reading a lot more. I've been more consistent in reading, and this has been a hobby I've done since I was a young kid. And then as I got older and felt like in high school I had to read like classic literature and write essays about them, the meaning in this, the symbolism and metaphors and all of that, I kind of drifted away from reading. And then as I got more engrossed into the culture of the internet, I also, developed an addiction, which I think is normal for anybody, with like community platforms, social media platforms and spaces. And I stopped reading. I just stopped reading as much as I used to. I think the last big series that I actually read outside of Twilight, which I did not like, in high school was maybe The Hunger Games. And The Hunger Games is good. It's not awful. You know what I mean? I think they're doing like a prequel reboot, right? Disney's doing a prequel reboot. And that was in high school. And then we got the dystopian teen angst chapter of young adult novels, right? You guys remember that? Where like Divergent and Hunger Games, I think Uglies and Pretties made a resurgence too, which I finally read Uglies and Pretties when I was in my early 20s. But after that, I didn't make space to read more books, right? So I was just always like glued to my phone and addicted to my phone. And it wasn't until recently, with me realizing how social media is high-key damaging a lot of us and damaging the way we think, that I thought, now is the time for us to pick up a book and start reading more. I am unemployed, so I don't really have much going on, and I could spend a couple dollars on some books that I'm interested in, or at the very least go to the library. So this new segment is called All the Books I've Read This Month. Just kind of talking about some of the books I have read in the recent months and some books that I am interested in reading or like in the process of finishing. So I guess one of the books I'm going to be talking about, which I haven't finished altogether yet, I want to talk about anyway, even though I haven't finished it. Like, I just want to talk about it because I really love it so much. And what I do usually is I will read a novel, and then I will read a graphic novel or a comic in parallel to the novel, And so the plan is I'm going to talk about all the novels or books that I've read this month, and then I want to talk about all the graphic novels that I've read this month, give my honest opinions, consider whether or not I would recommend that book, or talk about whether or not I'd recommend that book, and what type of genre I think it falls into. Now, I'm not going to lie to y'all, I'm not like a literary like expert, I'm not like, I majored in English. No, I think I took a couple of creative writing classes at my art and design school, and I did well in them, but I'm not like a super like duper like expert in like books and whatnot. So if I do say some things that are wrong, feel free to let me know in the comments, or that are incorrect, let me know in the comments. But also be nice about it. Don't be rude. You don't have to be mean. So let's get into some of the books that I have been reading and my thoughts, all right? So first book that I started reading, I actually read this while I was still at work, when I realized that we were getting laid off. Like, we had like a 3-month gap period, and then we were cut, like axed. I was like, you know what? it. I'm not gonna be at this job any longer. I might as well just, reread some books that I really appreciate. And one of those books that I reread was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I read this book for the first time in 2022. I remember it was like during the summer. I wasn't really the healthiest at the time, but I do remember enjoying the hell out of this book. And I remember it being a very quick read just because of how, witty Taylor Jenkins reads language is. It's not dense, like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, you know what I mean, or Edgar Allan Poe. It's about 385 pages long, but it doesn't really feel like it's 385 pages. It really does feel like, almost a movie, and, the main character, Evelyn Hugo, is taking you through her life. I really enjoyed this book, read it in 2022, gave it another read again in 2025. Oh my God, they're mowing the lawn outside and I don't want them to be too loud. I'm gonna wait for them to be done to mow the lawn. So I read this book again in 2025 because I wanted to read more. I wasn't really into my job like that as much as I used to be, because we were getting laid off, as much as I could just kind of relax knowing that my fate was that I would be let go from my job. So I reread this book again. And this is I believe this is the very first book I've ever reread again. Usually I never reread books. I don't know what it is. I guess it's because, I know what happens. It's going to get spoiled. It's not like cracking open a fresh new book and understanding everything and experiencing everything for the first time. You're not doing that so much when you read a book again. You know what happens. However, I've come to terms with, if stories are good and you enjoy those stories, kind of like a movie, then there's nothing wrong in wanting to read those stories again and, enjoy the experience again. Maybe you might find little things. So yeah, gave this book a second read this year, right? So technically didn't read this book this month, but did read this book a couple months prior to. So this book is about a 1950s actress named Evelyn Hugo. It's set in 2016 and goes back to the time period of the 1950s into 2016 as Evelyn Hugo exposes the notorious love life relationship between her 7 husbands, right? And she is interviewed by an up-and-coming journalist at a paper called The Variant, I believe, named Monique Grant, named Monique Grant. And Evelyn Hugo only trusts Monique Grant to tell the story of her life, her 7 husbands, and some of the secrets that she's been hiding throughout her career. And so Monique Grant is offered this opportunity. She takes it, and basically we do a time skip between 2016, 1950s, back and forth, and we see how Evelyn Hugo traversed and made it as a successful Hollywood star back in that time period, with all the relationships that she was trying to maintain and salvage, versus Monique Grant making big life decisions. This isn't really a spoiler, but going through a divorce and how that's kind of impacting her life and how it entwines with her relationship of interviewing Evelyn Hugo. You know what I mean? So warning, we're getting into spoilers, okay? I initially really liked this book, right? I thought it was very creative. Big spoiler is that Evelyn Hugo keeps marrying man after man to protect the relationship that she has with another female actress named Celia St. James. Celia St. James is a wula. She is a lesbian. She is a bona fide woman-loving lesbian, okay? And Evelyn Hugo, I'm pretty sure, is bisexual. And in order to protect the relationship of her and Celia, she just keeps marrying man after man after man to get the dailies, which I guess is their version of, People magazine, or the National Enquirer, or in more modern terms, I guess, what is it, Shade Room, their version of Shade Room. They keep prying in and trying to figure out whether Evelyn Hugo and Celia St. James are friends or a little bit more than that. So she keeps marrying man after man to get them off their back. So first time I read this book, I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. This is so riveting. This is so beautiful. I want to be just like Evelyn Hugo. I think she is an amazing character. And I still think that there are some positive traits to Evelyn Hugo that I rock with. However, I will say that after giving this a second read and then answering the book club questions, right? Answering some of the book club questions, I realized that Evelyn Hugo isn't that nice of a person. She's kind of a bitch. she's incredibly selfish, which, you know, as a selfish person myself, I get it, but like not in the way where I'm hurting people that I love, that genuinely love me, right? Because Celia St. James does love her, and in the book we see that Celia St. James has this heart to heart with Evelyn where she's just like, am I enough for you? I feel like I can't give you kids in the same way Harry Cameron can. So she decides to have kids like when they're living in New York, right? At this time, Evelyn and Celia St. James are both in lavender marriages. Harry Cameron, her producer, she's married him. He's gay. And then Celia St. James is a lesbian who is dating a football player. I forgot his name. And the football player was gay. And so the football player and Harry Cameron were seeing each other while Celia St. James and Evelyn Hugo were seeing each other. So it was like this cute little lavender marriage dynamic in 1970s, 1960s New York. And that's how they were able to get away with their relationship, right? But then there were times where like Evelyn Hugo wanted to have a kid, right? And Harry Cameron wanted to have a kid. So they slept with each other to have a kid. And, you know, Celia St. James is like, well, bitch, what the I thought you were mine. Why are we having kids? Why are you sleeping with men? Then there's this one pivotal scene, which is a big spoiler, which for like how they end their relationship the second time is when Evelyn has this role that can help resurge her career as a Hollywood actress that can get her the Oscar that she's always wanted. She works with a director who wants her to do an explicit sex scene with her abusive ex-husband. And she immediately is like, you know what, let's just do it. But she doesn't check in with Celia St. James to do it, right? And so she does the scene. It's great. It's awesome. It's great for the movie. Goes back to Celia St. James and tells her with like some lilies, right? Like, hey, girl, like, how do you feel if I do this sex scene with like my ex-husband? Like, how do you feel about that? And Celia St. James is like, bitch, absolutely not. She's like, girl, no. And so Evelyn, she's like, girl, I already did it. Girl, I already did it. And Evelyn's like, bitch, what the fuck? And so then Evelyn leaves, as she should, as she deserves to. Then they don't talk to each other for a while. And eventually they get back together for a third time under very unfortunate circumstances. Like, because this was the second time they were together, the first time they broke up, something similar happened where Evelyn tried to get the Dailies off their back because they were spending a lot of time together and they were trying to insinuate that they had a queer relationship. And so what Evelyn decides to do the first time is get with Mick Rivera, which is like, I don't know, they're Elvis Presley or something like that. They get drunk and, you know, tweak out and decide on a whim to go and get married. And then she sleeps with him that night and ends up pregnant. And then when she comes home and finds out that she's pregnant, Celia's like, bitch, what the f? I didn't think you would sleep with this man. And Evelyn's like, yeah, girl, I had to since we were married. Celia's like, girl, no, what? And so the biggest issue I have with this book and how Evelyn Hugo is written is that she's honest. But I feel like when people perceive Evelyn, like the first time I did, you think, oh yeah, she's awesome. She's so driven. She uses her body to get what she wants. She's like a femme fatale type of character because she has really big boobs. And she talks about how her big chest has given her opportunities that she otherwise wouldn't get. And so she just leveraged that for the longest time in her career before she was taken seriously as an actress. Initially I was like, damn, I want to be just like Evelyn Hugo, especially if you're like a girl whose body has always been like sexualized, whether you wanted it to or not. She's just so driven and she knows what she wants, blah, blah, blah. But then when I read it again, I was like, oh no, she's a bitch. She's very selfish to Celia St. James.
Hey guys, it's Editing X's here, and I want to talk really quickly about Evelyn Hugo and her need to be selfish, right? I don't know where I'm going to put this in the video, but I know I discuss how I feel like Evelyn Hugo isn't that nice of a person, and I'm hinting at her not being so much idolized as much because she is a very selfish person. I do understand that it was set in the 1950s, so it was a little bit harder for people to come out and be queer or gay or like dating the same sex around that time. However, I feel like Evelyn could have just done so much more to at least protect Celia because she knew that Celia loved her a ton. So I don't think I'm going to spoil this too much, but there's a particular event that happens that leads to the reason why Monique Grant is the only one Evelyn Hugo wants to give her story to. That in and of itself, like that particular scene when Monique figures out what Evelyn has done and why she's there and why Evelyn wants Monique to tell her story, that like horrendously selfish, you know, and I also think could have been avoided as well. I just believe that at the end of the day, there was still something that Evelyn Hugo could have done in the 1950s to both protect the relationship of Celia and honor the relationship, while also keeping the relationship hidden given the time period. And to be fair, you know, if they really did love each other, they could have just left Hollywood and just go be gay out in Spain somewhere, but I don't know. That's just something I wanted to get out. I didn't want to sound like I was undermining the fact that it was 1950s, like old Hollywood era, and being gay was like social suicide, not even social suicide, legitimate suicide back then. So
I don't like how the bisexuality of Evelyn is being written in this book a little bit. If I had to be brutally honest, it's still a really great read that I'd probably read again if I want like a queer love story to read with a lot of like sensational, like spicy, scandalous moments. But I just feel like, because I'm bisexual too now, okay, like let's get it straight, right? I'm trying to tread this carefully when talking about bisexual people. I feel like Evelyn Hugo is written as a toxic bisexual character who cares more so about how she's being perceived by the media than her actual relationship with Celia St. James and her love for her, and cares so much of how she's being perceived and goes so far in a way to the lengths of sleeping with men and giving her body to these men, knowing full well that Celia probably wouldn't be comfortable with that, right? Because I look back, like the first time she left Celia St. James, because she got pregnant by Mick Rivera because they got drunk and got married on the whim. And I'm thinking, like, if you really love this woman, you wouldn't have to sleep with this man. Like, you could probably like pull a Cardi B and him and just pretend that y'all slept with each other if you really did love this woman, right? And then the second time, incredibly selfish, because she only cares about her getting that Oscar and her being taken seriously as a actress, that she's willing to leverage her body in her favor in order to do so. Even though when she tells Celia St. James after the deed is done, Celia's like, I can get you as many opportunities as you want, but just please don't sleep with this man. You know what I mean? And she just does it anyway. I think that Evelyn as a character really doesn't love Celia St. James as much as she thinks she does. I think that she just likes the idea of loving Celia St. James, because if she actually did love her, then she wouldn't go to great lengths to try and cheat on her, and she would have probably worked around that. You know what I mean? Like, she could have still married Mick Rivera and they not sleep together. You know, she could have probably gotten another opportunity through Celia St. James, but through her own greed and knowing that she can leverage her body to get what she wants from the public, from men who want to be with her, she cared more so about like her reputation and her using her body to get there than like the security of the relationship between her and Celia. And then even with her marrying Harry Cameron and then having a kid together, they probably slept together, right? Like, there was no artificial insemination. I don't know if they did that. So, like, I don't know. I don't think she actually was in love with Celia in the way that she believes so. And I think it trickles into, like, I don't know, toxic bisexuality, which is why sometimes I wish people would write bisexual characters in a way that wasn't so toxic and selfish, because, like, I don't know. I feel like Evelyn was like very, very selfish, and it always seems like the bisexual girl is like running the lesbian haggard, right? Like, I just don't think that's fair. I don't think, you know, a lesbian character deserves that. But yeah, if I had to rate this book, I would give it a 7 out of 10. Apparently, this is going to be a movie, a Netflix movie. I just feel like if this book is going to be made into a Netflix series, then at the very least, if everything sucks, the time period is on point and the costuming and the set design is on point, okay? Similar to that Marilyn Monroe movie. Yes. All right, next book. Children of Blood and Bone. Okay, so this is by Tomi Adeyemi. Let me know in the comments if I pronounced your name correctly. And this is a young adult fantasy novel based on Nigerian African mythology, okay? The way I would compare this book is Black Panther's Wakanda, just like Wakanda, right? The setting of Wakanda meets Harry Potter. That's how I would describe this book. It is such a good book. I read up to like, I want to say like this part, like halfway into the book before I stopped reading because I started a new job and I was onboarding and I was just stressed with making sure I didn't up at work. And so I got back into this book again when I realized like, oh, I got a couple weeks left at work at this job before they lay me off. Let me just get back into this novel again. Loved it so much. It takes place in a setting where magic is banned, and it is like a fantasy type of setting. So there's like creatures, like they have these giant like lions and panthers that are always written about that they ride on the backs of. And there is a king who is desperate to eliminate and eradicate all magic and all the magi. Let me know in the comments if I'm pronouncing that right. The magi who consume the magic. The magi are the ones who are in control of magic. And so there's like this big huge race war between the everyday civilians who haven't obtained magic and the individuals who do have magic or who haven't like kickstarted their power and magic yet. It is a odyssey, I would argue, like an epic journey that really does a good job of like the hero's journey approach to the hero has her calling. She has to get the things in order to complete said calling and all the characters she meets along the way. So the main character, Zélie Adebola, is sent on a hero's journey where she has to bring magic back to her kind. She is a magi. Magis are going through a genocide by the non-magic users. And so she has to go on a journey to find certain things that this evil king who is eradicating magic has obtained, and then also go to this temple where, you know, it activates and gives magic back to her so that they can, you know, have a fighting chance against themselves. And so skip if you don't want to hear spoilers. So I really like this book. It was very fun. It gave heavy young adult novel tone. You could tell this is a young adult novel. It's for kids to get into, but I feel like it's a very fun read if you're just like an adult and you want to read some like Black fantasy. We don't get a lot of that, so it's pretty cool to see, you know, Black fantasy in a novel rooted in Africa and like Nigerian culture. So that's very cool to see. So I finished the first book, and this is a part of a trilogy, and I want to say there were some scenes in here that were really gut-wrenching. Like when Zélie gets tortured by the king and his henchmen, that was like really uncomfortable, and he like wrote maggot in her back. That's what they call the gray-haired individuals who are magi. They call them maggots. I felt like the love story between her and Inan, because they get like a little love story, I felt like that didn't need to happen. But I feel like for a YA novel to create discourse between the characters, it makes sense for it to happen. And I don't know, I just felt like they fell in love way too soon and they were way too trusting of each other. And then ultimately the way it ends, Zélie does the thing where magic is brought back to this world, right? But it's not just brought back to the magi who like control it, but it's also brought back to everyone. Originally, I guess, in this world, everyone had magic. Then somewhere down the line, I guess everyone did it and the magi had control over the magic. And I think Zélie had done something so that everyone could have magic again. And so I think the second book is going to be like magic wars, magic race wars, I guess. I think at the end of the book, Inan ultimately sides with the kingdom and protecting the kingdom over protecting Zélie and what the magi want. Because his whole call to action was, I can introduce the magi into this like atrocious system of the kingdom and them like causing a genocide towards the magi so that they can see that the magi aren't bad. And Zélie's like, destroy the system, destroy it. You know what I mean? And Inan's like, no, we can't destroy it. Like, this is all I know. So I think Inan, because at the end, the king, Inan's dad, died. I think Inan's going to take over the kingdom. I think that his sister, Amara, is her name? Amari? Yeah, Amari. I think her sister is going to be on the side of Zélie. And I think the second book is going to be a lot of bloodshed. So it's going to be interesting. But yeah, really like this book. Thought it was very great. This book is also going to be turned into a movie as well. And when I tell you they have an all-star cast, like Idris Elba, Viola Davis, they got everybody in there. Amanda Steinberg, though some people said that Amanda Steinberg was they said she was too light or like biracial or something. I don't know. I don't mind Amanda Steinberg being in the movie. I really don't. I don't think it's a big deal. But I'm also not first generation African. I'm African American, Black American. So, you know, how they feel about the movie holds more precedence than how I feel, especially if you're Nigerian. So if they have a problem with Amanda Steinberg, then, you know, I get it. I understand. It looks like the cast is going to be really good. Some of the similes felt a little redundant, but it's a young adult novel, so I'm not going to be too hard on it. And I think the characters all had like genuine motives as to why they wanted to do what they needed to. I will say that I did not like that Zaylee got with Inan. I did not like that, but that's how things were going to end up in the book anyway. Like, we were heading towards that from like chapter 1 when we realized that, spoilers again, Inan also has the same powers as the Magi, which is why he's able to do certain things and, like, you know, ultimately, which is like, and most people probably have magical powers in this world as well, as we find out in the end. But I just did not want them to fall in love for some reason, because I just knew how it was going to end up. I just knew Inan would want some other things because he's going to side with the best interest of the kingdom, and I knew Zaylee was going to be like, burn it down, and it was just going to be a tragic love story. So yeah, I still am going to read the second book and I want to review it with you guys, but I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. Very, very good. Great read. If you have kids, you want them to have like some representation of Black people in fantasy, right? Or African fantasy, I would definitely recommend this book to them. And I think this is going to start a whole subgenre. There's like other African-based fantasy books out there. But yeah, this is great. Definitely give it a read. All right, next book. Before I say next book, this book is like 450 pages. 500, no, I lied. With the epilogue, it's 525 pages. With the author's note, which I think everyone should read the author's note, okay? It's very important. Basically gives you the headspace of Tomi when she was reading this. It's 527 pages. When I was a kid, I used to be so intimidated by books that were like over like 300 pages. I used to be so intimidated, and I find it so interesting now that I'm an adult that I can easily read like a 400 plus page. I give no whatsoever. I find that so nice. Anyway, moving on. Dune. Okay. All right. So remember when I talked about how Elevyn Hugo was a book that you could read and you can like kind of get into and you wouldn't even know that you were reading almost 400 pages because of the language and how punchy it is and like the scandalous events that were happening, and it's not like, you know, an Edgar Allan Poe book where it's very, very heavy, very descriptive, or like a Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, right? Like, it's not a heavy type of book with like a lot of like heavy language and jargon and dense and stuff, right? Okay, Dune is the exact opposite of that. Okay, Dune is the opposite, and I want it to be cool. I want it to be well read and well versed, because the Dune trilogy is good, right? That's what I hear. Like, everybody of the Dune trilogy. And so I started reading it and I got to page 72, and I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to make Dune my project, right? And I'm going to read like 70 pages after a set of books that I have finished and cover those 70 pages. This is a very heavy book. This is heavy. This is dense. There's a glossary in the background for like some terminology that is used in the book. Like, you have to go back to the glossary in order to understand what's going on. Like, there's no way you can get... There's no way you're gonna get through this book if you're not hitting up the glossary in the back, okay? You gotta read the glossary, okay? Or at least like read, like I had to read the summary in the back of the book at one point to understand what exactly was going on in the beginning. And I'm pretty sure I'm gonna have to like get the Spark Notes. I don't know if Spark Notes even exist anymore, or the Cliff Notes of like certain events that have happened. So here's what I know so far, based off of what I remember. Paul and his family are moving to an inhospitable planet where they are going to, I guess, bring civilization to said planet, right? And the discourse that goes on between Paul, his mother, who is the concubine of the Lord, and his father, right? And so it's like some like political, geographical discourse. Paul, I guess, also, please be nice to me, because this book is heavy and I'm pulling out of my ass like what I remember from this book. But like, Paul also has like these powers as well, and you know, he's coming to terms with that too. And it, you know, I guess the way this book is going is how this family is going to colonize, they're colonizing this inhospitable environment, what that's going to look like. I really would like to get through this book before I watch the movies. I hear the movies are really good. I like Timothée Chalamet and I like Zendaya a lot. So yeah, I just want to get through this, so when I actually do watch the movie, I don't know, like, I know what's going on. I could be like, hey, that's so-and-so, you know, that's Paul. Heavy ass book. Like, when I say heavy, like, not even physically heavy, but just like descriptions. Like, it's dense. If you're a sucker for like spacing, it's all very close together. There's like really like no chapters. It's just like these little like excerpts, and then it moves on to the next part. You know, I feel like if you're feeling ambitious, I would give this a read. Or you could do what I'm doing, which is like after every 72 pages, you read a set of books and you come back to this one. But from what I know right now, they have safely landed on this planet and are inhabiting this planet, and I guess we're gonna figure out the discourse between how they inhabit this planet and the politics behind it. I've also dog-eared like when each trilogy ends, so I know how much book I have to read. First book is 406 pages. Second book is I think 154 pages, so that I guess that would be the Dune Messiah, right? And then the third book, Children of Dune, is going to be 298 pages, okay? So it's not like an 800-page epic. It's just like all three of the books are shoved into one big book. So, you know, it makes it easier for me to know what I need to tackle. But yeah, Dune is heavy, bro. Dune is a lot. And I find myself like dozing off from time to time, or like having to reread parts to understand what happens. My suggestion, I don't know, take a brisk through the appendix. I feel like that's my problem, is that I didn't go through the appendix and the glossary to understand like what these things are, so that when they're talking about them, I know what they're referencing. But excellent world building, I guess, for Frank Herbert. Like, you know that you've made a wonderful fantasy novel if you need a glossary in the back. So far, I would rate Dune a 5 out of 10, and it's only because like it's just really heavy and really dense, and it's not easy for me to get into. But that does not mean that I'm not going to stop. I'm going to stop reading it. I'm going to keep reading it and you know, challenge myself, but also it's going to be difficult. And so for that reason, I'm just going to give it a 5 out of 10 for now. And then maybe when I do finish it, you know, maybe I'll rate it differently. But definitely recommend if you want like classic fantasy, I guess, or if you want to just like be up to date with the movie, or if you just want a challenge, definitely recommend if you're into that. But it's heavy. It's a heavy ass book, physically and mentally. So next book. All right. So Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This was a nice short little read, and it basically covers a relationship between two women. They are married. One stays on land. The other, she's a marine biologist who is on a mission to explore the ocean. She goes under the sea to, like, you know, explore the ocean, see what's going on. An accident happens in the submarine where her and her crew members sink to the very bottom of the ocean. She's stranded at the bottom of the ocean for about like 6 months at a time. And then when she is finally saved and comes back to the top of the ocean, she is not the same. Something has happened. She's just very absent-minded, out in the distant, very distant from her wife. Her name is Leia, and the other wife's name, who's on land, is Miri. And Miri's trying to figure out what has happened to her wife, Leia. It's very like cosmic horror type, very like conspiracy theory, X-Files if you're into that, but also a very character-driven novel. Very, very character driven. So before I get into spoilers, I felt like the ending of this book was a little bit predictable. Like I knew where it was gonna go, but now, spoilers. In this book, Miri finds out that whatever has happened to her wife, the company that has supported and funded her to get under the sea and like explore and has inevitably had her trapped to the bottom, they are no longer in business anymore. They're not answering any of her questions. She can't get any type of compensation, and she's literally seeing her wife dilapidate before her very eyes on land. How this book ends, and again I said spoilers, so don't be afraid. Just, you know, skip if you don't want to hear this. But Miri has to let her wife go back into the sea. Like Leia needs to be in the sea because she can't survive on land anymore. She like ever since she's gotten back, she's needed to like be close to water. She can only drink water. She can't really eat that much the way she used to. She has to, you know, be in a bathtub now. As we get later in the book, she has to sit in a bathtub and like rot in there. And then one of her crew members who was with her on the trip, Leia, her sister comes back to Miri, Leia's wife, and tells her like, oh yeah, so she died on the ship. I don't know what happened to her, but like the company that funded the expedition, they're not answering my phone calls. I don't know what's going on. So then Miri and the sister of the woman who died on the crew or the expedition. They kind of come together and team up to figure out what's going on with Leia. But then at the very end, Miri understands that she has to let Leia go to like in the sea. Like she has to let her just like, she's changing into this creature where she can't stay on land anymore. She has to go underwater and she has to live underwater and exist there, you know. Very sad love story, very sad sapphic love story. I didn't cry the first time I read this, but I feel like if I'm probably gonna give this a read again. I'm probably gonna cry because at the very end when Leia is coming up above water, she says how all she can think about is Miri, but then when she's above land, like she's so distant and gone that like she can't see that Miri like needs her to be present, needs her to be there, and then Miri has to deal with the fact that her wife is no longer the same. Very, very, very sad story. Like I said, very character driven, so you're not gonna get a lot of explanation as to why, you know, this company like stopped contacting them. Like even I would say down at the bottom of the sea, what Leia sees at the bottom of the sea, you're not going to get an explanation of that. What was going on with the other crew members and why it was affecting the woman and not so much, I think his name is Mateo, the other expedition member there. Like you're going to get a lot of that from this. I would classify this into like weird girl horror, but it's not really horrifying as much as it is tragic. I think what's happening in Leia is horrifying, and like seeing Miri's relationship like crumble before her very eyes can be horrifying. Like I said, the ending was predictable for me. I knew it was going to happen. At this point, I'm very much so into the way a story is being told. My favorite part about this book is when Miri is coming to terms with Leia might not come back. And this is before she comes up above surface. Leia is, you know, trying to contact this company and be like, where's my wife? Where's my wife? They're like, you know, the expedition has been lengthened. It will be okay. She'll get here when she gets here. And she's just kind of come to terms with like, she might not see her wife again. And so what Miri decides to do is join a role-playing forum about wives who have lost their husbands in space, to kind of cope with the fact that Leia might not be coming back and just what that might look like for her. So she's kind of cosplaying this idea, role-playing this idea that like she is a widow, you know, in this forum of other women who are role-playing the ideas of that they are also widows as well. I thought that was very interesting and really told a lot about Miri as a character on how she's like going through this grief of where her wife is, you know what I mean? But predictable book, but still not bad. Very short read. I think if this was ever to be adapted into a series, there's a lot of breathing room where you can kind of explain the gaps of like what happened with the company that sent Leia and Mateo and the other girl down to the sea, down to this expedition, whether they knew that they were going to sink to the bottom of the sea or not, because on Leia's side of the book, she's always hinting at the fact that nothing really struck the ship. It just stopped, like it just powered off. Like we don't know what happened, you know what I mean? Maybe explain the creature that Leia saw. Also maybe explain when she finally reaches the bottom and the creature that inevitably lets them go back up again. Maybe like further explain what the other woman who passed away, you know, what she was going through, what the intentions of this company was now that they have disappeared. You know, maybe they'll explain that more in if this was to be made into a series or even like a movie. Similar to Brokeback Mountain. Yeah, I'm making that comparison. Not because they're queer stories, but because in Brokeback Mountain, it's a short story. And so the screenwriters and the directors and the producers had a lot of breathing room to really like lengthen the amount of the story into a fully fledged epic between Jack Twist and Ennis, their thoughts and emotions and what they're going through that I think only a short story could do. So maybe Our Wives Under the Sea can get that same treatment, you know, and maybe Our Wives Under the Sea could be the Willow version of Brokeback Mountain and win all the awards it needs. You know what I mean? I don't know. But I really like this book. Definitely give it a read. It's a very short read. There is some times where it feels not really boring, but kind of like a slow burn of what's happening. So I would be prepared for that. But I'd also go in understanding that like a lot of things aren't going to be well, like really explained to you. You're just going to have to go with the vibes and be fully engrossed with the motives of the characters and not so much the like explanation as to why things are happening. So I would rate this book 7 out of 10. Definitely give it a read. Next. Okay. Bunny by Mona Awad. Okay, so this is peak X's hyper fixation interest. Okay, this is peak interest of X's. Okay, I liked Bunny. I know there's some people out here who actually did not like Bunny, and I'll go into details why when I cover the spoilers. But this book is such a fever dream, a wacky ass fever dream. This is a book that you literally have to just let it consume you and just go with the vibes. Just go with the vibes, okay? And then just like, I would say be open to things being like not fully like spelt out or spoon-fed to you, and be open to endings not fully being resolved, okay? Like you really have to just let it happen, more or less, okay? So this book is about a scholarship student. Her name is Smacky, Samantha Heather Mackey. Her friend Ava calls her Smacky, and she's a part of this like elite New England University for creative writing grad program at this university called Warren University. And she is a part of this class with 4 other girls that are very cliquey, that all call themselves Bunny. That's where we kind of start. Like, it doesn't like talk about like how Bunny originated. I think you are being shown through the point of view of Smacky how enamored and obsessed she is with these 4 girls who call themselves Bunny. I'm gonna call them the Bunny Squad, okay? And in this book, we see, which is my favorite thing, my favorite genre of woman, my favorite brand of woman, her kind of descend into madness to try to appease and be brought in and under the wing of the Bunny Squad, okay? And the dynamic of the bunnies, how the dynamic impacts Smacky, how the dynamic of Smacky impacts her friend Ava, how enamored Smacky low-key is with her friend Ava. It's all very, very interesting, and it's all very like thoughtful and intriguing. Definitely recommend you give this a read if you want weird girl horror. This is it. This is right up the alley. It is about 305 pages, so depending on how fast you can get through 305 pages, I would say it's a pretty easy read. I'd say the writing isn't dense at all. It goes very, very fast. I would say there were some moments where I kind of lost track a little bit and I really wasn't understanding like what direction the writer was going into. One portion of this book where she's talking about the background story of Smacky's parents and how they met at this certain, like at the place where Smacky's from. And I kind of lost my train of thought a bit, but I think that's because I really wasn't like paying attention in the way I need to. I don't think it was because of the writing, but sometimes the writing really like has like this very creative way of explaining backstories of characters and why they move the way they do. So yeah, just be aware of that. It gives like culturally vibes, like without spoiling, it's like a spookier Mean Girls, okay? Now I'm gonna get into the spoilers. With spoiling, it's like Mean Girls meets The Craft. How do I say this? This book is very open-ended, and this book doesn't spoon-feed to you what exactly is going on, okay? And so I think a lot of people did not enjoy this book because like one of the arguments was that it sounds too millennial, which if this was set, I believe this is set in like the mid-2010s, all right, which is like the peak era for like young adult millennials probably going through grad school. You know, I'd argue, okay, yeah, it's probably going to sound a little millennial, you know what I mean? But I think they mean it in a way that feels like quirky, pretentious, where it's like you're not trying to say that you're better than people, but you also like say little phrases or do little things or writing patterns that might make it seem like you're better than people. I don't know. Saying that this is written to millennial when it's probably actually written by a millennial and set in the time period where millennials would probably be going to grad school is a little wacky to me, but that was one of the arguments some people had as to why they didn't like this book. Like it insists upon itself on some Peter Griffin shit. I did not like The Godfather, you know? I can see that maybe, but I still liked it because, you know, I was born in 94. So maybe that's the millennial in me that's just like, yeah, I kind of like it, you know what I mean? But I think the reason why some people didn't resonate with this book in the way that they wanted to, or they felt like this book, like Reddit hyped it up way too much. I think that the reason why is because you're not getting spoon-fed exactly what's going on. And it actually took me going on Reddit and looking at comments to see what people were saying to understand how exactly this book ended and why. Okay, so big spoilers, all right? In the beginning of the book, Smacky has a friend named Ava who she's very close to, that she's almost like low-key enamored with, you know what I mean? Like she thinks that Ava is this version of her that I feel like she wants to be, but feels too fearful of being. She's very bold, very confident, very like in your face, really does not like the bunnies at all and calls them out on their shit every single time, right? The bunnies are people who are all girls who all hang out with each other, who've kind of enmeshed in their personalities. But as you figure out later on in the book, they actually hate each other. And so there is some like ulterior force that is making these girls come together. There is some ulterior force and ulterior motives that is making these girls want to come together and want to interact. In this book, we realize that the bunnies are so infatuated with each other is because they all have like weird Wicca witchcraft superpowers where they will go get a bunny, like a literal bunny from outside, like axe it, and then make like a fictitious man of their dreams. That's what makes them so close, is that they are actually low-key a cult, making fictitious men from the top of their heads that are like their ideal fantasy that they can like be fully around and obsessed with, and have these men obsessed with them and fully in love with them. You know what I mean? And so the reason why they want Smacky in it is that later on the line, I believe, is because Smacky has the same powers as the bunnies do. She's actually more powerful than the bunnies because she makes her own male avatar. I think it's out of a different animal, not out of a bunny, right? And this male avatar actually terrorizes the bunnies and breaks them apart and makes them less powerful because she develops her characters in a way that are like very like honest, very brooding, and very authentic to the feelings that she has. She is obsessed and infatuated with the bunnies. She wants to be a part of the bunny squad, but she hates those girls and she wants to bring them down a peg. She thinks they're too perfect, they're too elite, they're wealthy, all of that, and she needs to figure out a way to bring them down, is what I got from Smacky. And so she creates this dude. Inevitably, when the bunnies kick her out because she's not able to make a man bunny avatar in the way that they have, she gets kicked out of the group because they realize that she's not as powerful as they thought she was. And eventually she's able to make this super edgelord type of male avatar from a non-bunny that I would believe is like a cross hybrid between Bill Skarsgård, Jacob Elordi, and Peter Steele. Yeah, like just imagine that trio circulating, who comes and terrorizes the bunny and who's actually able to have sexual intercourse with these characters, right? And you see later on the bunny squad interacts with them and they change their whole appearance, mindsets, and viewpoints based off of interacting with this like one singular dude, that male avatar that Smacky has made, that is just like dismantling their entire like cult, you know what I mean? And so that already in and of itself might be hard to catch on to if you're like not really paying attention to what's going on in the book and how it's being written, because it's very fever dream, it's very open-ended, it's very like you gotta go for the vibes, you gotta go in knowing there is vibes, okay? Later on, we find out that Ava's actually not real, that Smacky has made her up from her mind. And then later on, we realize that all the characters that she's interacted with are actually, they're probably figments of her imagination. Like there's this one guy named Jonah that like wants to hang out with her and is like a really nice, good guy. And she doesn't really give him the time of day. We realize later on that he was made from her mind too. And again, when I was reading this book and I was trying to interpret the ending, because it's very open-ended if you're not congregating online and figuring out like how other people interpret it, you would be very confused by the ending and what's going on. You'd be like, okay girl, what did I just read, right? But it makes so much sense. The reason why the bunnies wanted to invite Smacky into their group and wanted them a part of their like, you know, weird witch cult thing is because Smacky has the same powers that they do, but I feel like in a more like brutal, honest, authentic approach. I feel like the bunnies aren't able to make these male avatars in a way that are very authentic or even have all working parts. They look good, but you can't fuck them, you know what I mean? But Smacky's able to make a male character that is like that has more autonomy, that doesn't need to be told what to think. And I think the bunnies were trying to siphon off of that, if you will. But even the bunnies didn't even know that this was the capability of her powers, that she was able to break up this group with her own imagination, which I think is a very big theme in this book, is like, I guess how writers create certain characters in their mind where they are not so much flawed, they're very perfect. But then as you creep closer and closer, especially with the bunnies like male prototypes, you see that they don't have working parts, or they're a little bit severed. Their hands still have like the bunny paws, you know what I mean? Or they might be like dismembered. The biggest symbol I could see from this book would probably be authenticity and a writer's ability to make authentic, honest characters versus a writer's ability to not be able to make those types of characters. And so this book is set in a writer's school, and the bunnies and Samaki are all part of this like special grad school creative writing class. Smacky says that like a lot of the writing that the bunnies come up with is like very like lackluster and uncreative, even though the professor loves it. And then they say that Smacky's writing is very depressing and grim and it needs to push or whatever the pretentious bullshit they do in writing grad schools. I don't know. And so I think what this book is trying to say, because they're all writers and they're all trying to create characters from their mind and their characters actually come to life. I think what this book is trying to say is like, how good are you at making authentic characters and making authentic characters that are human enough, that are flawed enough? You know what I mean? Yeah, that's the theory I'm going with for now. I think that a lot of people did not like this book because it, like, if you don't, like, it is very, very deep. It does have some pretentiousness in it, like it insists upon itself a little bit, but it doesn't spoon feed to you that like Smacky not only created this like new avatar named Max, but she also created Ava too. And that the bunnies were like really interested in Smacky because they knew that she probably created these characters, right? It doesn't really talk about that. It doesn't like lay that out for you. And I feel like if a book like this did lay that all out for you, then it would not be as good anymore. And I do like books that are open-ended, that are open to interpretation. I really like the way this book like makes you count what actually happened towards the end of the book to make sense of how the ending came to be. You know what I mean? A couple themes I also want to talk about is, I would say, like some sapphic undertones with the obsession that Smacky has with her made-up friend Ava. That's a theme we can talk about, and how she's worried so much about hanging out with the bunnies that she isn't tending to her other man-made avatar of Ava, who's too cool for school and doesn't give a fuck about what the bunnies think, right? And then I'd say another theme is the power girls have, or women can have, when they congregate and are in community with each other, and how they're willing to forego that power in order to be a vessel for a man, or gain the approval of a man. I think we could talk about that too, but I would rate this book a 9 out of 10. I liked it. I'm probably going to go back and read this again. It's a very, very good book. I'll probably read this again next year during the fall time because it's like a very Halloween book. This is also, I hear through the grapevine that J.J. Abrams' studio is making this into a movie. I don't know how that's going to look. I really want a woman to direct and write the screenplay for this book. I really do, because if you got a dude in there, if you have a dude writing a book about like woman friendships and how like a dude can come in and destroy, and how certain unknown forces can destroy said woman friendships, and how they can borderline be culturally and all of that, I don't think a man should be writing that. I think a woman should, because they are more authentic to the experience. That's all I'm gonna say. I would like to see Diablo Cody direct this. I like Diablo Cody's work, so I think that would be cool. And I'm interested in, I might give Mona Awad's other books a read. I hear that Rouge is the same kind of weird girl type of fascination. And then I haven't heard too much of 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl, but I feel like that would be up my alley too. So yeah, I give this 9 out of 10. Definitely think you should give it a read. And yeah, you got to go in with the vibes, and then you got to be open to whatever like this book is trying to tell you, I guess. Also, have you all noticed, like, what's the deal with this funky ass font? A lot of these adult books have like very interesting fonts, and then they always have a silhouette of like what the book is about, and then like the text over it. Like, what's the deal with that? Is there a lore behind this? I don't know. Anyway, moving on. All right, so I'm not technically done with this book, but I'm further enough in this book where I like where it's going. Sorrowland by Solomon Rivers. This book is good. Girl, this book is like peak Southern Gothic horror, and I was looking for specific Southern Gothic horrors that were black coded, right? Very much so this. I've been talking about this a lot on my stream because I haven't finished this book yet, so I haven't really covered any other book after this one. So I'm a big fan of this book, I'm not gonna lie. I really like the way this book is written. I really like the way, the pacing. This book is very, very queer coded and very like brutally honest about like the main character's queerness. And I'm gonna just give you a synopsis of what's going on before I get into some spoilers. So this is about a character named Vern who is a part of a cult, I guess set in like the South boonies, like the boonies of the South, like in the Appalachia somewhere. This cult is very like pro-black, separate yourself from the white man and anything curated and created by the white man. So they make everything from scratch. They make their food from scratch. They're very like religious and devout. Like they practice spirituality in a way that like it's in parallel to Christianity, but also in a way is a lot different. Like Christianity is a very Caucasian religion. I'm gonna just say that, right? This is like the pro-black Pan-African version of Christianity, I guess, but almost to like a cult level. Vern's friend, Lucy, escapes the cult, and then Vern finally decides that she's going to escape pregnant with her 2 sons. She ends up having both of her children out in the woods and stays in the woods for a while, enjoys it, but is also going through some changes that she can't really explain. And then she eventually escapes the woods to go find where her friend Lucy is, okay? While she's doing so, she's being hunted down by people from her cult for whatever reason, and that's the big conspiracy theory. This book is 355 pages. It reads very well. It's very easy for me to make a movie out of this book. Like, for example, Dune, it gets very hard for me to like make a movie in my mind of what things are supposed to look like because of how dense the language is, how the dialogue, like some of the things the characters are talking about, I don't know about. This type of book, right? It reads in the same way I would say Evelyn Hugo does, where it's easier for me to create a movie in my mind of what's going on, of what the motives are, of the characters are. There's also a lot of punchy one-liners that I would actually put on my wall of some. I think that they're really good. I think if I give this book another read, I'm gonna get a highlighter and highlight all the quotes that really speak to me, and then I don't know, put them somewhere, I guess. So there's that. So I would say this book is easy to get into. It's very thriller. I would say the slowest part is probably the second part, Fungus, but it's very character driven, and you really understand what Vern is going through, the changes Vern is going through, and how she is correlating that to the characters. Also, the character Gogo sounds very attractive, like very attractive. Like I imagine Gogo like a Native American Savika. I don't know. Getting into the spoilers, okay? So I think this book does a very good job with like tackling conspiracy theories and related to, Black culture and how Black people or Black movements are stifled or dismantled. Because in this book, we find out, or we're going to find out that the cult that Vern was a part of was actually a test experiment done by white folks, I guess, to see if they could create like certain like creatures for whatever reason. Again, I'm not completely done with the book, so I don't know what the why is. But okay, I'm gonna do my best to try and explain this. Okay, so COINTELPRO. I don't know if I should be talking about this on YouTube. It's always towards the end of my YouTubes where I get very conspiracy theory, and I'm not even trying to sometimes. So COINTELPRO was a series of covert and illegal projects conducted between 1956 and 1971 by the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting American political organizations that the FBI perceived as subversive. Groups and individuals targeted by the FBI included feminist organizations, the Communist Party, anti-Vietnam War organizers, activists in the civil rights, Black Power movements, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and the Black Panther Party, student organizations such as the Student Democratic Society, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, environmentalist and animal rights organizations, American Indian Movement, Chicano and Mexican American groups like the Brown Berets, and the United Workers and independent movements, and so on and so on, so on. So basically, COINTELPRO was a group that went in and they would kind of destroy these radical political movements, right? Little Bill does a great video on them. I'll link it below. You should watch his video. It explains everything clearly, especially with what's going on now in the world. But I bring up COINTELPRO because I think the way the direction of this book is going is that the government is trying to dismantle like this Pan-Africanist type of Black cult, if you will, or Black tribe. Spoiler, but Reverend Sherman's father was actually an informant for this cult, and they have been drugging, because they have to drink this drink in order to reach ascension, right? They have been drugging these members of the cult so that they can eventually turn and evolve into like these weird fungus exoskeleton creatures that Vern is like evolving into right now. And so that's kind of like the commentary I guess this book is making. I've noticed at the very beginning of this book, the way Vern talks about this cult, or the way Vern views this cult, is that she does not really like the idea of the cult. Like on the outside looking in, something that's very like pro-Black, you know, erasing the white man from anything, you know, that could have some positivity, right? Like on their Dr. Umar shit, that could have some really good positive impact on people, right? To, you know, really keep the community and the dollar of the community inside and not having to spend any of your money outside or any of that, right? However, as Vern talks about the cult and talks about, you know, the beliefs, for example, she's a queer person, and how when they inevitably marry Reverend Sherman, who's like a whole like grown man, and she's like, they're like 15, Reverend Sherman's like, you can't look at that woman that way. Like you can't be basically gay. That's ungodly. That's invented by the white man. And so what I initially saw from this book is that while this cult initially means well, we can see that this cult actually has some negative connotations in the name of fighting for Blackness and Black power and Black unity, because it is very misogynistic. It is very dated. They're drugging their members of their cult and ultimately poisoning them and changing them into weird fungi exoskeleton creatures. You know what I mean? And so Vern escaping the cult to go see her friend Lucy, which, spoilers, like Lucy doesn't survive, I guess. Or I don't know if Lucy doesn't survive. Like, I'm still not done with the book. Hopefully she does. But look, it's perceived that Lucy is still dead. But, you know, Vern is now exploring themselves and what they're into. They are exploring the idea and concept of gender. I believe Vern is intersex, right? And they choose not to really gender their kids. They just let their kids like function as children. And then their attraction to characters like Ollie, who ends up being a bad guy who's trying to, I guess, control the fungi people, the Black fungi people in this cult. And then characters like Gogo, who they build a relationship with. I think that contradicts what something like a cult, a pro-Black Pan-African cult, would not be in support of. And so already you're seeing like this super hyper pro-Black cult that really isn't pro-Black in the way that they want to be. Maybe like pro-Black masculine, but like not pro-Black feminine, not pro-Black queer or any of that. And so this cult gets infiltrated by an informant that's ultimately destroying the individuals on the inside and turning them into weird exoskeletons, versus this outside force, this ulterior force of like white supremacy that, you know, Black people like Vern would have to go through, or just contributing to a white society in any way. And I think it's interesting to see the parallels between the two. Both have like positive aspects about them and negative aspects. Positive aspects about like the whites, I'm gonna call them white society that Vern isn't a part of, which is like the everyday world that like you and I are a part of right now, is that like you're not sheltered. You know what's going on. Things like being gay are okay, which is something that Vern is. Vern is a queer person. Things like being like eating regular food, knowing how to operate and live in this society is okay, right? However, the negatives is that systemically, this society has not been in favor for people of color, has especially not been in favor for Black folks, Black Americans, and all of that, right? Which I think this book is trying to say. And then with this cult that Vern is a part of, the positive side is that you do get that representation and you do get that example of Black unity and not wanting to have the Black dollar or their services or their work be expunged by the outside white society, right? Like, this is the ideal, in one way, an ideal utopia of what, you know, Pan-Africanism, like pro-Blackness, advocates would be for. But on the negative end, while in the name of doing that, they still have some very corrupt practices. They are following the constructs of a white-coded religion, Christianity, and their own unique, like, black version of it, but it's still very sexist, it's still very bigoted, it's still very homophobic, and it really doesn't work for the space, the truth that Vern wants to live, right? It doesn't really work for them. You know what I mean? And that's something, a downside I can see in a lot of like Pan-Africanist movements, Dr. Umar coded Nick Cannon when he was having a bunch of fucking babies type of movement, right? It doesn't really work for someone like a Vern, which is why Vern had to escape. It wouldn't work for someone like me. It wouldn't work for somebody like you if you're watching me. I at least assume that it wouldn't work for you. And I think that's the interesting, like, overarching message that I think River Solomon does very well in conveying so far. I like the exploration of Vern's queerness in the book. Okay, for whatever reason, all right, I really like the scene where Vern is talking about how she masturbates in the woods. I don't know why. I just think it's like so honest and so raw because she's incredibly shameless about like being okay with her body. But I just really like her like taking care of herself, right? Because she's been trying to take care of her kids. She's trying to find Lucy, her friend, and then she's being hunted by this cult and I guess the government. And so as she's going through these changes and she can't really explain like what is happening to her, she's just like very vulgar and raw, and she's like, you know what, I'm gonna rub one out in the woods. And I'm okay with that. I am absolutely okay with that. I'm like, you know what, good for you, sis. And also, okay, so this is gonna get very like, this is going to be very niche and specific to my black girlies out there, because I feel like, and you can disagree with me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there is a need to make black women conform into a certain version of themselves, a more palatable, respectful, very rigid gender coded version that I feel like a lot of black women, black femmes just don't really align with, you know what I mean? Like they don't feel represented by. And I think what this book does very well is they subvert those tropes, because I can see somebody's auntie, my own auntie, reading this book, seeing that Vern is rubbing one out in the woods and being like, ew, like that is not ladylike, that's inappropriate, like, you know, where is this class and dignity, and that's what's wrong with this generation, and all of that nonsense, right? Or just being completely turned off by the fact that Vern is a queer woman, a queer person, you know, with babies who she chooses not to gender or identify their gender with or entertain non-binaryism with them. I hope I said that right. And I really like that we have a novel like this that is subverting tropes of what we should expect from black women and women of color into something that's very raw and honest and authentic and sometimes nasty. Like she talks about in this book when she gives birth, it like she explains how it's very like vulgar because she's giving birth to her babies in the woods, and how it's just like, you know, fluids and shit and piss and all of that. And it's like, well, you know, that's what giving birth is. It's a beautiful but also kind of gross phenomenon, and they target all areas of the experience, you know what I mean? And the connection Vern has to the woods, to her most raw and authentic self, versus her trying to assimilate to like this everyday society, and how this like literal fungus inside of her isn't letting her assimilate. Like she kind of has to like take heed to the fungus inside of her. I really like that too. I don't know where I was going with that point, but I just like the rawness of it, the brutal honesty of it, that it's not trying to be respectable, that it's just in your face what she's doing. I like the intimacy between her and Gogo. I really like the way Gogo's described. I like the way Vern's described. Vern is apparently albino. I would like for it to be made into a series. What would I rate this book? TLDR. What am I giving this book? So far, I would give this book 10 out of 10. I would say that some of the criticisms I have is like certain plot points not very well explained. Like Gogo immediately knew that maybe like this is a Quintal Pro type of situation going on with her, with Anne turning into a fungus. And then like there was some introspection between the character where I guess the character finally realized like, oh my God, like they're working with the government. I don't know. That felt a little rushed to me, but I mean, I still like the book. Other criticisms that I have, I feel like some things about the cult aren't further explained, but like, again, I'm not done with this book. So I might come back to y'all with Sorrowland and be like, actually, this book is phenomenal. I love it so much. I give it like a like a 10 out of 10. I think it's very good. I think it's a very good commentary on how the government works to dismantle political movements that they don't agree with. But in this case, they're like dismantling a cult, and like how far they will go in order to dismantle said cult. Definitely recommend you give this a read if you're really trying to read something spooky and horrific, but also like Southern Gothic vibes, because she's out in the woods and the Appalachians and all that. Like, I would definitely give this book a read. Okay, and that is it. That's all the books I've read this month. I think the next type of video I make of this, I'm going to do it with my graphic novels, because I've been reading a lot of comics lately and talking about them. Hopefully you guys like the format of like one half of me explaining the book is me talking about non-spoilers and the other half is me talking about the spoilers. Hopefully that's okay with you. I'm just gonna put a big spoiler tag underneath the description so that you guys are aware that we are going to be talking about spoilers of this book. And then if you guys are interested in actually reading said book, you could have a discussion below. But I do recommend that if like you haven't really read these books and you don't want to be spoiled, you probably shouldn't watch this video. But then also, even if you were spoiled from these books, but based off of the recommendations I gave you, I think you should still read them anyway, because they're still pretty good. Personally, I don't really like to be spoiled when I read books, so I understand. So I don't know, I might change the format of this where I don't spoil the what's happening in the book too much, because I want to encourage people to read. Damn it, we need to start reading more. So I don't know, that might change in the future. But anyway, guys, we are done. Thank you for watching my video on all the books I've read this month. I will probably see you guys next month with more books that I've read. Hopefully I can scour some dollars up so I can buy some more books, or just go through my list of books over here. And then I'll finally be done with Sorrowland, so I can give you an update on my final thoughts, because I have 85 pages left before I finish the whole series. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, please do not forget to drink some water. I will see you next time. Have a great rest of your week, and goodbye.